Welcome back. So today we're going to be finishing off some of the UI components. I've got a list here that I want to work through today, including text, a cursor, and potentially a text box, so you can have inputs. But there is one thing that I've changed, and this is my software version control, which is currently tracking the project that we've been working on. So if I just fetch the previous version, you can see all the changes that have been made to the files. So in the launch game bat, so this is something that you would pretty much see on like GitHub or what's the other one called? Atlasan or something. It's something like Atlasan. But essentially it's doing the same thing. It's just this is just a localized version of it, which I built a while ago. And what you can see, we've just changed some of the bat files, which is just the things that run the game. And essentially all I'm doing is, instead of when we launch the actual game now, it'll ask us which browser we want to launch it in as one of the launch for the game launcher, which is a new, or the launch game.bat, which is a slightly newer version. We have this run game bat is the one that we've been running, and that's just been launching the server, and that's going to continue to do the same thing. So I could just show you the actual files instead. And this is running off a Node.js server. So let's just go and have a look at, I've got two of these open. We'll just edit it just so you can see what's in there. So previously it was just the cmd/k, this line, the highlighted line, which just runs the server. And the same with the run editor. Game launcher is the new one, which just allows us to open. Obviously this is running in Windows. If you're using Mac, I think you've got to use a bash file, whereas this is a bat file, so the commands are going to be different. And basically runs a slightly, I see it as similar to an assembler language, but although it's just running on an interpreter, or at least line by line. Right, so let's get on with it. Game client, we can just open up all the files. Now render square is something that we've been using for a while, and I wanted to finish off the button because right now the button uses triangles rather than an actual square for the button, so we want to change that up a tiny bit. So render square, we can take, this is the part that draws it after the transformation, and we can do the same thing hopefully in here, which means we haven't got to go through all the UI. So this dot actor, the size, now this size has to be a .x and y, which it is, which then also means that we have to do the divide by 2. So divide by 2 because we're measuring it from the center, so it's always going to be half of the actual. So if the size is the width, the distance from the center from the width, its distance from the center from both sides is going to be half the size. And always on .x on this side, and the other side will be .y. Also need to make sure that the these colours do represent the same on both, which they do, and we don't use it here, so just make sure everything is set up. And okay, we need to add those in to this as oh, now I'm already here. So again, this is going to be .x divided by 2. And this is the y, which is divided by 2, and this is going to be .y. This is x, but this isn't times 2, it's just 2. It's just the raw value, because this is the width, which does actually represent the size. Size is width and height. So now if I run, right, obviously because I've turned that off, and we launch it, we can just go 3. Now that's red for the button, and it should still function as it did before, with the being clicked. So we also want to get rid of all this debug information, so we should do that as soon as possible, which you have to console.log. So if I just highlight the console.log, we can see where I'm writing to it in multiple times, which is only once in here, which means it's probably, when we go to actors and layers, it's probably mouse down, there's probably one still around in the actors or in the actor. Maybe it should be some mouse down. It could be anywhere though, so could also just look at what it says, triangles button. Okay, so it's in the triangles, not the actor, which makes sense. So console.log here, and that should, because there was 2 triangles, it should be done, being clicked. Right, so actors.0. User interface dot 0 rotation equals 50, and that should still work. Oh, okay. Okay, well, whatever problem that is, we can figure it out later on. And I do want to change this render square to render rectangle, or yeah, just do rectangle. So this will actually change its property from property interface to user interface. I'm actually going to just take it from the button, user interface, because they use the same style. And this render square is no longer render square, it's render rectangle, which also means now that this size is also going to be a vector. And we can put in 30 by 30 just as default values. Then we can go to the button and we can just take this, because this is going to do the exact same thing anyway, only that's got a few more little things added to it. Now they're going to both break because I've changed the name. Right, so in the game client I have got so it is in properties, we take that render square, we're going to take this out and we're going to put it in the user interface as render rectangle. Now we're going to open it, and render square disappears. I'm sure I copied it, yes. Which means now that I've got to use the render rectangle as a user interface rather than a property. So let's take this render square, we need to duplicate it, I'm going to take it and put render rectangle, JS file, the directory, and we're just going to put it above it, and we're going to change obviously the name to rectangle. Make sure I've spelled it correctly, not rectangle, but rectangle. So now that's in, we need to use this rectangle and we need to go to the core, and we'll be updating this next time hopefully. So render rect, and now if we run it, it should, user interface is not defined. Right, well, user interface needs to be added to the list first. And call it. check this. Rect is user interface. Okay. I think I know what happened. I added it as the render property, I added it as a property rather than a user interface. Add UI. And there everything should be fine. Property undefined x at 28. Okay, so it says somewhere here the size is not right, it's a new vector, that's why. And now we're back to type user interface. Flag is not a function. Right, so apparently flag in range, I believe it was, is not the term, not added in the user interface, which it isn't, and that means I need to quickly add it in here. It's not flagging, it's flag on click. Second one is just set all these. Now I have checked that all this does work, at least. Well, I haven't checked the Node.js version, but I have checked the HTML version, and now everything's broken. No, it doesn't, unless I've accidentally delinked. In the core, render rectangle equals new add property to layer 2, that's layer 2, and that's layer 3. Right, just taking into consideration the actor's X position and Y position. Right, so that's good enough for me. But why has Control 1 stopped working? Because Control 1 is still tied to it, or just Control. Because size cannot no longer just be 15, because that's just a number. It needs to take into account a vector, which we can just put 30 and 15. So now it's a rectangle, and it should be displayed as 1 as well, which it is, and the other one is just a red square. We might want to change this to more neutral colours, so just like your monochromatic scale, so that white to grey is like a neutral colour. So 555, in the outline I can just put it 000. Now we should just get a grey box as a default, which I think looks slightly more professional than different colours by default. And we'll just do the same with this, and we might just do 666 or 777 and 000, just so we can distinguish between a button and a render rectangle. So obviously this is being set, which would be like setting your inspector kind of thing, so we can have whatever color we want on this object because we've defined it, but we haven't defined these. So by default they want to have something that looks relatively palatable. I also want to actually, I don't know if this has been taken into account, but I want to put the actual stroke after, just because the fill might overwrite some of the stroke, even if it's just slightly, which is not something I want. But yeah, now you can see the outline is much more vivid, especially on these two. Right, so now we want a, I'm just going to copy this, which I know we shouldn't do really, but render text, and we're going to do a text field now, so I'm not going to have a size on it. These can just be regular, and we'll see if these can work. Just going to change the language to JavaScript, and then we're just going to save this as user interface render text. So that's been saved now. So first of all, we want to have some font styles. So yeah, style first, and we'll just give it a name. So we'll probably put something like Arial, and we'll copy this and we'll put font size, and then we can just put in a value like 15. So we don't need to actually do this. We don't need to draw a rectangle either. So why is it done twice? Just check I'm not doing it twice, which I am. I'll just check I'm not doing it. I am doing it twice here as well. Let's just get rid of that. Now we've got a begin path. And we'll set the font to equal this dot font size plus this dot font style. So that should give us the correct style. Now if we wanted to optimize this, we could obviously add in a way of storing this so it doesn't have to calculate it every time, but for now it should be okay. And we've already forgot something, which is we need the text. We can just put default in there for now, and we can probably leave it like that for a while. So the fill and the color, so we need to go Actually, we need the outline, I believe. Outline can be just 1 pixel, and I think we do actually need the size. So that like I haven't just read it off a piece of paper. But we can do 100 by 30. And just put this back in. I'm not going to do it this way. We're going to do a fill text. Which is a capital T. And underneath this we can have the stroke text. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the font outline goes in the first element of the stroke text, or the first argument of the stroke text. Then we can do this dot size X and this dot size Y. And when we do the fill text, we can just put in this dot text, and we can just use these same 2 parameters as the last 2 parameters. And now I've got a feeling that we did actually need to have the stroke and fill. I don't know how you set the fill style. I'm assuming it would be fill style equals this dot fill color fill, and I'm just going to hope that's what we actually need. And to get this to work, I need to go into the index file, duplicate the render, and put render text. And we can go back to the text file, render text. Oh no, we need to go to core, and I'm just going to add it to this proper, like this one. And I'm just going to put render text as the first object, and we're just going to turn it to render text as the property. Copy it, render property. Then when we add it to the UI, we just add the render text. Now we can see default is being written, but apparently I might have been wrong when it came to this outline. I think it might just be this text. Yeah, so font size is a little small, so we might add it up straight to 30. And that did not do anything. It's probably because this needs to be pixels and it needed a space. It's probably just putting 30 area. Just check I spelled aerial correctly. Aerial. I wonder why it's not. So I'm just going to try a console.log just to make sure. For some reason it's not taking this into account, so it's possible that undefined, okay. It's because it's a capital and not a capital 2. And there we go. We have green text that just says default. And again, I'm just going to change that from. Oh, it must have been set in the core. Yeah, so we've got different fill value, so you can overwrite it. Yeah, interesting where it's. Why is it still going undefined in there? Obviously it's not undefined if you're using it. Text. Oh, it's because I didn't change the names in the console. Right. Oh, and I think we can test something else with this. I think I put it to MB0 and now it should interact with the mouse button. Yeah. Just in case you was wondering how you can actually use a mouse like a regular button. You can just use it as, instead of putting the X, you just put MB and then your mouse button. So right click should be 2. And as you can see, it's working. I'm wondering if that first parameter is not the size but rather the offset. Where is it now? Make sure I edit the right file, otherwise we'll never know what's going on. Whatever. Maybe I clicked the wrong one, I don't know. So render text, we're just going to put it as -100 and just see what happens. So that might just be a position value, which it doesn't look like it is. I'll have to check at some point what that value actually does, because I'm pretty sure. I originally thought it was going to be a way of clamping the actual text so it doesn't actually draw outside of the size parameters, but apparently that's not the case, because I've never really used text. Which is slightly annoying, so at some point I'm going to have to figure out how to do that manually. Right, so what else did I want to add today? So we just got basic render text. I might put render button. So because all of these have got render at the start, I might as well just put render at the start of this. And if I get to index render button, and it should go mad at me for getting rid of it, and we can put it back in. And we'll do a cursor. So we need a cursor, so I have critter, and you can create a new one. So I think I've already made it, but I think I only did something like 100 by 100. That might even be a bit big. I might have just done a 50 by 50. And essentially I've just marked an X just to denote what a cursor looks like. So something that looks a bit like that, but I've neatened mine up a bit more. So you could simply use something like that. The reason I'm using critter is because you can get the alpha channel on the background, so that it actually doesn't render anything where this is, so it actually looks like it is just an X following around the screen. Right, so I've just got to go and grab that from here. So I'll just grab and drop it into the core, because why not? Image assets. I'll just call it an image assets folder, and it's just going to store there. Now you can see it was a 32 by 32 image, but as you can see it's got a slight white outline and it's just basically a black cross. And there is some slight difference. It's going to be slightly different to using an actual UI. I'm actually just going to use the event engine to actually draw the cursor. So var cursor equals, and we can just make it an object, and we can just go active is true, URL is, and now what we want to do is use the relative URL to our game client, so it'll be core/image assets. I'm going to put slash first, core/image assets slash, and then I just want to take the name of the actual file. So if it's a PNG, you'll have the background cut out as well as some other formats, but JPEG does not, so just bear that in mind. I'm just going to put cursor on the top level, and I should have saved it as a .js. And now, to do with the actual cursor itself, I want to look at the index and just check that I'm free to do this, which is on layer 4. Now we could just add in another 5th one, or we can put layer cursor. The reason I'm doing it on a layer cursor is so no matter what happens is I can always locate the top, the layer the cursor's on. So I'm just going to call it layer, and I'm going to pass it the parameter of the layer underscore layer dash cursor, which should store a reference to that object. So then when we can do a draw, and then we can set it to a function. And in this function we're going to go if cursor dot active, then we're going to go for the layer dot we want to draw image. We're actually going to go image equals new image. This is not how I wrote it down, but I'm pretty sure you can do it this way because I've done it before. Well, I've done it in a similar way before. Cursor dot layer dot and then we need to put layer context as well. Context 2D. And obviously this URL is the default one, so I'm going to put default. Just in case you wanted to add in, because if you look at the cursor right now, we have it in the text mode, and if I hover over this, we've got it in the pointer mode, which is the default mode. So if we wanted to use something like that, we would obviously want to be able to change it at some point. So that's why I'm using all these. Cursor.context. Draw image. And cursor dot image, then so a cursor dot image is pointing to this new image object. Then what we want to do is want to put the size of the cursor, which is going to be 30 by 30. Well, we're going to try it at 30 by 30 anyway. So I'm actually going to change it to size. So then we can just put in a new vector. And we can put 30, 30 in there. So we can just change the size of it rather than just changing this every time. And we don't just want the draw function, we want the clear function. Remember to have these commas at the end of every setting or declaration. And I just want to set the context cursor dot context, and I just want to take this from the scene or the layer. I think it's the layer. Dot run on start dot clear. I'll just take this information and I'll just throw it in the canvas. And so it's context. We just want to change this to context. So that should clear it up. And before, because I've just noticed, cursor.size, because it's default true, we can always keep it as true. So make sure this is a comma, except for the last one. The last one doesn't have a comma on it, so I need to add this to right now. It shouldn't matter, but it shouldn't come after the, it should always come after the call. I think every file should come after the call. So that should get loaded. Now we just need to fire this whenever we need to. So how does the call fire? Does the scene.clear? Oh, I can just put it on the clear. So cursor.clear, probably capital C, and draw is the next one we need to do, which means on we'll just draw it at the end after it's cleared it. Cannot read property of null of get context. Right, just make sure that the way it's written in the ID here is also the same way it's written in the ID here, which I believe it is, but I think I missed the octathorpe or the hashtag at the start. So if we set this up now, cannot get context. Line 6. Seems right. Is it definitely a canvas? It is a canvas. Huh. So apparently if I press escape it closes out my video recorder, so luckily I caught that before we lost anything. So get context for some reason still isn't working, and button is not defined. Setup, so it might just be the button at the moment that's causing the most problems. Let's just fix that 'cause it's the easiest one and we know what's going on. It's because we changed button to render button, and that's the only thing that should really need to be changed. Import cannot read property of type null or context, so Right, the cord is being activated before the cursor. I think the cursor needs to be activated after the call for some reason, which is not true. We can put the cursor before the call, so luckily we've got a way of fixing it. And that's obviously not going to fix it because this is scanning for something that isn't available until after the web page is loaded, because obviously it's looking for it here, but it hasn't loaded everything below it, which is the actual layer cursor. So we have to be very careful about this, because when we call scene in here, it's looking for all the cursor functions, which technically does mean it needs to be above the core. Or maybe not, because it's on load. We can just do cursor setup there. So anything that we can't define when it's initiated, then we can just put in the function. And we can put it as a blank or a null. And then we can, probably would have been better to have copied them before actually going through all this now, because I've got to put a layer in. Control D, and it's going to be context. We'll get context 2D, and we're just going to put the context in here. So it's null, so if we ever do actually call any of this information or use it here and it's still null, it will actually get an error. So we have to be careful that we have actually set up the call, the cursor. So I'm going to put cursor setup, and I'm just going to call it, and now hopefully that should go all right. An identifier. What's with identifier? Might mean I've missed out a comma, and there we have. Cannot read property of URL. Cannot read property of URL. Because it's default URL. So cannot cursor dot default URL. Why can't it? I don't think it needed this, but I might be wrong, so I'd rather test something that might actually work rather than test something that might not work. Vector is not defined. Okay. So there's only a few things that I'm actually going to be able to be defined at the start. That's okay though, because we've already done it now, so hopefully that should be the last thing, and set up. Cursor is not defined at window.unload. Okay. What's this on about? Cool. Okay, so line 16 on cursor. Equals no vector. What's it saying? Unexpected token, close brackets, cursor. Comma. Colon. Cannot read property of width on 28th. It's canvas.width because it's not in the layers. It's got to go to the cursor. We'll get there in a second, and we'll just have the cursor being drawn. Right, so we have the cursor being drawn, but where is it being drawn to? Wait always. Now I need to have a look at the inputs. With the input file, I'm just going to drag this to the end. We're going to look at raw mouse now. It's not raw mouse, I'm going to get the get mouse position. So get mouse position dot x plus I'm going to get the dot y. Now this might work. Nope. And that's because I've added this to the wrong line. Cursor dot y. And I don't want it to take every single part of it, so I need to use the cursor dot image dot width dot height, and I also need to put 0, 0. So now this should be starting position. So I need to put the starting position for the y, the next parameter. and X and Y. So I'll just show you what this needs to be in the parameters. Let's also make sure that I haven't missed anything. Two. Yeah. So where I'm starting to take the image from, how wide the image is, how tall the image is, the starting position of the X, the starting position of the Y, the cursor size and the cursor size in the Y direction. Now just to make sure, I'm going to turn this back down to 1 frame per second. That way I'm more likely to catch a glimpse of it if it pops up. Which it has not, so something's gone wrong somewhere. Let's go cursor.image, and it could be that nothing's been stored in the image itself. It's starting to look more likely. So I'll see, did we not set the source of the image up? And apparently it might not just take the image, so we might have to put this in SRC instead. Now it's slightly off because it's taking the center of the coordinates, so the top left, the coordinates. So what we just need to do is this plus a half of the size, and this plus a half of the size in the Y direction. And now they should always center on minus a half. And I'm just going to quickly, I'm going to just turn it to 15. It's going to be slightly jarry, but you might be wondering why I'm using this, and that's just because at some point I do want to go and set pointer events to, I believe it's none, but I can't remember if it's none or it's there's a way to turn it off, I just can't remember. No. Just check that if I put it in fill. No, so it's not detecting that I'm over that. It might be because it needs to be on this one. If I put fill. This is how you change the style of the pointer. Obviously it's not. Well, I'll figure that out for next time anyway. So I wanted to do a text box. This is going to be slightly more complicated, so I'm just going to copy the rendered text and I'm going to put rendered text box. I'm going to set the language to JavaScript. I'm going to save it as text box.js or capital B and render. Now it's rendering. All I've got to do now is set this back up in the index. Render text box. And we're just going to attach it to the core. Attach it to one of the actors, which I'll probably do it to this actor. So property. I never use property 2, so I'll just use that. Render text box. The controls fine. If we look at the property, I'm just going to add it to the second. So right now we've got add UI. I might change this up, but should be okay for a little while at least. Text in this case is going to be this dot text plus equals the input dot stream. I think I need to do a join, and I think that needs to be join with no the limiters. Input was close to the end, so stream. Which means now if I did we set up the input stream? Stream push event key frame update. This might be in the core. Core scene.run, then we do the frame update. So the draw GUI should be on here, and it should clear after, which means I'm going to put the default as nothing, and now I've attached it to the other actor, which means we should probably have a look at this first. User interface 32 and flag is not set up, so apparently it looks like I set it up to the wrong actor, wrong parameter. So property 2, 2's add UI, and actor 1, render text box, which should be render text box, and it uses user interface, and user interface has all that set up. Render rectangle, render property 2, and property 2, and it's the only one of its type, so that should be fair game. Line 32. On user interface. Set up as a privatized property. Basically saying that the render text box, we didn't put this at the bottom, so it's going to flag up some errors there. There is no backspace at the moment, but as you can see, we have got a file, a stream reader at least. We can always add in an event, so when the backspace is pressed, that it does actually add or removes a key every time, a letter every time. Obviously, you can I think we need to modify this slightly because I think this only does the key itself. We need the key code, or we can just look for the key, the backspace key, and we can just register it as add it as an input. But we can do that another time, because I'm not sure what the backspace button is off the top of my head. But we could we can do it quickly. So input dot, I'm just going to have a look at not render button, render rectangle. No, not render rectangle, control. Where's control? Control 2. I'm going to just have a look at the keys, grab a key, and we're just going to say that it's going to mimic backslash. We'll put 2 in just so it denotes it as a backslash itself. Because a backslash acts a bit like a command, so it doesn't recognize it as a command apostrophe. We have to put a backslash, which just means it escapes the backslash, so it just appears as one backslash, which doesn't make much. It's hard to make it make sense, but that's essentially what it does. And I know I can't explain it very well, but my mind's preoccupied with what I'm doing right now, so it's hard to explain it. I don't know if this works with strings, but I know it works with arrays, which is just pop, which I'll just remove the last, was it shift? No, it is pop. We pop the last array off it, so if this is still apparent in the string, if this works with string, it should remove the last letter every time I press backslash. Right, that was not going to work. So it's probably something like substring this.text equals this.text. If I had to guess, -1. Cannot read property of rotation. Undefine control 2. So I'm just going to put it as X, just because I don't know if my browser's got a shortcut for backslash or anything like that. Shouldn't have, but no, that's what's breaking it. So it shouldn't be substring RAM. No, it should probably be substring. It's just probably because it's 1 character long. Let's just go -1, should in theory just take out the last letter that was added. I still think it will break if we put into no letters. So if I type X, it breaks. Control 2. Just this line of code. No, okay. Something big is going on here, so control 2. Find property render square. Render square does no longer exist. Should probably be find UI or something. I was wondering why it was breaking. It's trying to rotate a property that's no longer with the actual element itself. Right, now go back to putting backslash on it. Well, it would probably help if I put length at the end of it. And obviously the M is being written over, so we need to set that as it comes essentially. So that is now working, and all it took was to put the length on. I'm still curious, was my instinct correct when I put this in? No. Okay, that's fair enough. I know in some languages, I think, although it might be like slice or something like that, I'm thinking of. Might as well try it while now. Or splice. No, doesn't matter because that works. We just need to change this to the del command or the backspace command, whichever one you want to do. Well, we've got to set up both of them. But that's what needs to be set up next, and that's all I'm going to do for today.